Good morning, good afternoon, and to some, good evening, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles, and we have a very fun episode. This is something we really enjoyed doing here. We did this last year for the first time, and we said we were going to do it again, and we're bringing it to you again. We do a cross stream with our good friends at Left Reckoning. If you are new to the channel, please hit like, please hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell so you are alerted whenever we drop new content, as we are constantly changing things with the channel. We're always adding shows, impromptu things. And if you have the means and you feel so inclined, become a patron. We are back to doing movie night. It is officially on the calendar as a monthly event now. We just did our first movie night in close to a year. We watched A Soldier Story. Also, I'm back to cutting all the clips again from the show since Bajalan is far away in the UK. Can't help like he used to. And we have a new clip up of Pascal talking about the slappening, as we like to call it. It's doing really well. Also, check out Pascal on Woke Bros with Wrzesniewski, where they have a very deep dive discussion on class and being Haitian. And on that note, let me bring in my favorite Haitian. Is he maybe the best Haitian in left media? I say yes. I say yes. You show me a better Haitian in left media that lives in Miami, in the suburbs, that only eats Subway than Pascal Robert. I dare you to challenge me on that. Please welcome the man of the Mau Mau Hour, the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. Jason, before I forget, I've got an idea for the next movie night.
What is that?
Free State of Jones.
Oh, I've never seen that.
It's a good movie.
With Matthew McConaughey?
Yes.
I think our co-streaming show guest has some information on that movie, because I know he was reading a book about that whole situation. Also, let me bring in, he was the only black man in Maine. Now he is one of many in Northern Virginia. He is Marcus of the Left Flank Vets.
What's up? Pascal, and before we get into the guests coming on, Jason already told me that the next movie night's Belly.
I don't have a problem with Belly, but I don't think it serves the political purpose of it.
I mean, maybe not everything's about the political purpose.
Belly is actually part of my analysis of hip hop music,
hip hop, film, and underclass ideology.
Yes.
Listen. I am very democratic when it comes to movie night.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember I have a Facebook friend who was posting about movie night, about Free State of Jones, and the reason why he was posting about it is he showed it to his class as an example of cross-racial coalitions in the 19th century. And I figured that, particularly because of the kind of broad audience that we have, and since we talked about that a lot, it'd be an interesting subject. But we could do it another month. I am not opposed.
No, that's actually a better idea. No, we're fucking around about Belly. I'm not that serious. I really hated that film. It didn't hit me like it hit everybody else. It should felt like a long-ass video. I was like, this sucks. I hate Hype Williams.
Okay. I only need the first 2 minutes, and then I'm good. The first 2 minutes, and then off. Thank you. But it's basically a music video, so.
And coming all the way live, he's feeling better. Djene Bajalan.
Greetings, everybody. It's nice to see you, Jason. It's nice to see you, Pascal. It's nice to see you, Marcus. And it's nice not to be ill, because Plague Island has been taking its toll on me. And hopefully I'm now recovered We won't discuss the ongoing symptoms I'm still suffering from, but the road to recovery has been an exciting journey of all kinds of different symptoms. But
I must say, please give me this dispensation. Ramadan Mubarak to the believers of the Muslim community who watch our show.
Oh,
yep, it is Eid.
What's
So so everybody should be ready for their the spiritual time, this fasting, and all the good stuff is in the Muslim shops in
That's correct.
England. They have all the good sweets and all the good breads, all the good stuff.
Fast all day and gorge your food down your throat all night.
is that some sort of Muslim version of
That's not what people should do, but that's
that
what some
basically
people do. That's what happens.
I want to
Because
fast all day.
Because people get up very early to eat their food before the
Suhoor.
sun comes up, and then they wait till the sun goes down. And you're supposed to be, you know, if you're doing it properly, you're supposed to be kind of moderate with your eating. Although some people, they go over the top with the Ramadan spread at the end of the day. And great fruit and a great time to purchase dates. If you want to get good dates, they'll be in the shops.
I got a fridge full of dates, and I had some fruit for the morning.
There you go.
Speaking of old people diets, let's bring in our guests, Matt and David from Left Reckoning.
Good to be back.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I am very, very excited for the show today. I was racking my brain on what we could discuss and have a fun discussion about. And I think I got some topics. I emailed you guys last night a slew of newspaper articles, and actually a lot of that shit's been on my mind on some pieces I've been working on writing.
Thank you for the triggering, Jason.
Oh, you just wait. So we have a new segment here, and I wanted to bring in our co-streaming partners for today. It's called Trigger Warning, where I usually try to find a program or a news story to trigger Pascal, because there's things that trigger Pascal in a negative way where he goes on Facebook rants, and there's things that trigger Pascal in a funny way where he goes on these impromptu roast sessions like he did in the clip I cut about his non-understanding of what alopecia was.
I thought it was a fruit.
I still haven't laughed that hard in a long time. And you thought alopecia was a black person's name. I thought that
It could have been Pookie's cousin. Shaniqua, alopecia. I mean,
but I want to bring up a name from the past. I vaguely remember this from the early 2000s. Do you guys remember Enron?
oh,
Yeah.
hell yeah.
Yes.
Okay. There was another scandal that happened around the same time. It did get national attention, but maybe not to the level of Enron, because I think Enron had some involvement with the Bush family. Do you guys remember a cat by the name of Richard Scrushy?
No.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Doesn't ring a bell?
He screwed.
Come on, we're better than that. Richard Scrushy was the founder of a company called Health South, and he was indicted in 2004 on dozens of charges of fraud and embezzlement. And he went from hero to villain virtually overnight. He was kind of the it boy, and all those finance shows on Fox News, they'd always talk about Richard Scrushy. He had that story of hardworking young man that built this this health company up from the ground, multi-billion-dollar company, and he was indicted on like 84 counts of fraud. And Pascal and Marcus and David and Matt and Djene, he hired not a powerful New York attorney, but he hired a black civil rights attorney to defend him in his trial against the state. Is this ringing a bell at all, Pascal?
No, but I know I'm going to get pissed off real quick.
Well, he became the public whipping boy of a virulently angry community that once adored him. Instead of begging forgiveness or admitting culpability, and on the advice of his prominent black civil rights attorney, Scrushy turned his back on his former admirers and used his shared persecution story to ingratiate himself with the one section of the community that had not completely rejected him, the Black Christian community. Pascal, he literally went to the most prominent Black pastor in Birmingham, Alabama, is where he was located. And he was accepted into the Black church to the point where he started his own religious television show.
Oh Lord.
Oh my God. Every sentence. It is like a blooming onion of hell.
And he was found not guilty on all charges.
Of course.
God helps those who help themselves.
There you go.
America loves a good salvation story.
After he was acquitted, he then cut ties with the Black church.
No. How could he?
Every day at court, he was seen with a cadre of Black pastors and community leaders
Wow.
hugging and embracing him. I can't make this shit up. I would show you the clip from the documentary, but after last time, YouTube has a serious hard-on for fucking cutting me off the fucking air. Serious hard-on. Like, it's mad erect. And so but I have to tell you, I have to describe it to you. The state does not like losing, especially to local lawyers. He had the Black civil rights attorney who hired another attorney. What do you call the other attorney? Co-counsel. The co-counsel was a white attorney that was in DUI court. And the white attorney, when giving his opening statement, won the jury over by saying that this case, like his grandmammy told him, was like a pancake. And there's two sides to every pancake. No matter how.
Breakfast wisdom. I mean, that's powerful shit.
Oh my God.
I don't know what the legal argument against that is.
And Pascal, so as the resident lawyer here on This is Revolution, is it the second or third year of law school that you go into the pancake defense?
That's a new one on me, bro.
Pascal is so pissed off.
Not Ivy League, I take it.
Literally everything Pascal talks about on this show happened in that episode. A prominent civil rights attorney that learned how to defend people and how to win civil rights law literally turns that around to make millions of dollars defending a billionaire scumbag who eventually did lose. The state got smart and actually got a Black prosecutor the next time.
I got, man, it's good, to have a nation built off of laws.
And so the
right?
Black prosecutor got him on corruption charges where he was bribing the governor of Alabama. And then they were not done with the first charges of fraud, retried it in higher court. Richard Scrushy ended up paying $2.8 billion with a B, billion. He had some ridiculously egregious crimes with his defrauding of Health South. Basically, he was lying on his report, on his numbers. When you're a publicly traded company, you have to give your earnings, and he was lying every year on the earnings. They were making such little money. They were literally paying more in taxes than they were actually earning. He was taking the money that he had fleeced from the people, the investors, the shareholders, and started a country music career.
I thought you were going to say a country as in a nation. I was going to say that.
Yeah,
No, he started a country music career. He hired all the top musicians in Nashville and started going on tour.
2 sides to every pancake is his hit
2
song.
sides.
It's the second side.
Well, I will stop fucking with Pascal, and I'll give you guys some good news. Friend of show, I think he was on your guys' show back in the TMBS days. Chris Smalls.
Mm-hmm.
There was a huge victory
Mm-hmm.
yesterday. Amazon. Here, let me get my notes up. I'm sorry. The victory for the Amazon labor union at the 8,000 worker Staten Island warehouse is easily the biggest victory for the labor movement since the successful 1997 UPS strike. The tiny independent union that had no dues payers and was headed by Christian Smalls, the Amazon worker fired for protesting the company's lack of COVID-19 protocols in March 2020, is one for the history books. You cannot find a bigger David versus Goliath labor victory with no resources on the union side versus the country's second largest employer since at least the 40s. The final vote count was 2,654 to 2,131, an incredible 11% margin of victory. The Amazon labor union is feeling the power of the people, and the vote demonstrates our labor power and the hard work put into this campaign. That's a quote from worker Brett Daniels, and this is taken from The Lever. Matt and David, what say you about Amazon?
Well, I mean, I have choice words for the company, but I mean, this is like not only like a very impressive victory because of the scale, but I mean, what's really notable are 2 things. It's like these new kind of union models from Amazon to what's happening at Starbucks right now. I think people have a hell of a lot to learn from. This kind of bottom up unionization drive is working. And I mean, that's fucking exciting. And I don't know if people saw this because obviously the focus was on the victory there. But in their corporate filings that they had to put out yesterday, literally on the deadline, Amazon, it turns out, has spent $4.3 million over the past year in trying to shut down unionization efforts across the country, in Staten Island, also in Bessemer, Alabama. So I mean, it gets even more of like a David versus Goliath story when you realize just how much resources Amazon was pouring into stifling this thing. And I mean, credit to Christian Smalls. I mean, a lot of people, when that happened, I think a lot of people thought that this might just be somebody who was going to become a figure to talk about why we need unions. But by God, I mean, the boy, like he did it. Like he went out there and made it happen instead of just being a cautionary tale into an inspirational one. I mean, hats off.
Yeah, and I just like that Jeff Bezos is focused on going to space with like Pete Davidson. As all this is happening. But yeah, I think that's it. Is like, when you see there's certain efforts and there's certain elements in this case, like they're starting an independent union from scratch, where you say like, good luck with that, and you don't expect a victory, so it's like we'll look to like these other union efforts to maybe where we'll get the actual victory, and then to see the actual result is, I think like David said, it's very exciting.
And I just want to add on to this. Christian Smalls is exactly the type of person who needs to be leading a left-wing movement. And we've said this numerous times. It's a common theme we talk about. There's nothing wrong with being a middle-class PMC intellectual if that's what you are. But to build a concrete movement, you need actual working-class cadre. And Christian Smalls is the type of working-class cadre that needs to be supported. And it really is an interesting counterpoint to what happened at Bessemer, where it seems there was a lot of national emotional energy in Bessemer, which is located in a place where there is really not much of a left-wing cadre, whether it's a middle-class left-wing cadre or a working-class left-wing cadre. But New York City, I think you do have the kind of Brooklyn swingers, jet set leftists, but you also do have a left-wing labor tradition in that complements that. And I think it's very positive to see a working-class person who has been persecuted by his employer come back and win an important victory. And I think this is a really important counterpoint to what happened at Bessemer, where it seems like a lot of outside energy came in, but the grassroots on the ground were not there to ensure the victory.
I
Well,
think one of
it's a victory that I think people should celebrate. I hope it's not sabotaged anywhere down the line. Staten Island is a very reactionary part of New York City, and hopefully they're able to successfully keep that going. I was wondering, not that we want to go into like left gossip, but does anyone know what this beef is with AOC in terms of this whole situation, that she was supposed to be supportive of this? Allegedly, she was not. And there was another left content creator that she had like a beef on Twitter all about. We're like, what? Does anyone fill me in on the details? Or?
Over my head.
I mean, it was like a back and forth, I think, with like Crystal Ball and Jordan Sheraton from Status Quo.
Coup.
No,
Status
Coup.
Coup.
Is it supposed to be pronounced Coup? Yeah, okay. I mean, whatever. Like that. I think like the only thing I'd be like happy about, whatever that little dust up is, like at least it's an argument about something real, i.e., support of an actual movement, and not for some like flippant, something like force a vote or some shit. I think what's important about the organizing effort, though, is how they did it, right? And like we're talking about, like Djene made a really good point of like why this, Chris is effective, and what the tactics were of the groups who were organizing was like literally a lot of like bus stop organizing, a lot of like just creating events that people want to go to and educating them a little bit, but actually just saying, hey, this is like there's a place where we can be comrades. And that's something that I think like is very important to like take away. And like one of the things too is that like you're talking about bus stop organizing in New York, and we're just coming out of winter, so like these people were like freezing their asses off to make sure that they get the word out. And so yeah, that's what it is, just like hard work. There's no secret to this shit. There's just hard work.
Shout out to Marcus for dropping the hammer.
No, I mean it is hard work, and like this is something I think too, like especially with the first round in Bessemer, it shows that like media strategy isn't going to be what's going to be able to win these things. I must say though, I think that it's important also not to be down on the effort in Bessemer, because it's extremely historic and a hell of a lot of work went into it. I think what we can do is looking at what works and what doesn't, I think is important. But I mean, the fact is that like what happened in Staten Island was like a meteoric rise, and it was absolutely incredible and should be celebrated. But these campaigns take a long while. Amazon is the most powerful corporation, in the world, and you look at even in Bessemer, because of the hyper exploitation that people are facing there. Amazon understood that they could cheat in the first round, the first election, and then the NLRB is going to sort of take their time and read all the notes before they're going to actually get involved. And there's an incredible amount of turnover in Bessemer. Like a lot of the people who voted in this vote most recently, they weren't there a year ago. So like it's constantly having to like rebuild those kind of coalitions and movements. And I think that like these kind of bottom up union campaigns have a lot of promise, and that's something that I definitely like support, and I think we should be seeing more of. But I don't know. I think that it's important too, not to just say like, oh, well, because what happened in Staten Island was victorious, it means everything that's been going on in Bessemer has just been this kind of abject failure. Because a lot of guys really put their neck out there too, and they were fired in Bessemer for union
Bessemer's
organizing.
getting closer, and that's like Bessemer is still moving in the right direction.
Exactly.
Well, I have a question for you guys. How do we operationalize these tactics and actually have them become massified in a larger scale? Because they seem to be getting some traction.
I think like for major.
Oh, go ahead, Marcus.
I was gonna say, for major national orgs, just humble yourselves and learn, and like just pay attention to what was happening on the ground. It's as simple as that, but with the understanding of nothing's ever going to be able to be black and white, copy and pasted on another community. So I think it's like like going into like what we're gonna be talking on later about LAPD and LA gangs in their sheriff's department. It takes local people, it takes a working class movement, and you have to be from there in order to like really tap in to what are the threads that are going to be able to be pulled. And so, yeah, if whether you're, like your local or national org and saying, oh, wow, this is amazing, it's not necessarily about Chris, which, I mean, very much pat on the back. Like he's the fucking man really that was like that has been grinding this out and putting his neck on the line. But at the end of the day, there are just concrete things that people did that can be repeated.
I think also what's interesting is Chris was not concerned with celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
He never really got.
He could have made a podcast.
Yeah.
He didn't do what Black Lives Matter did.
No, not at all. He stayed the course, and I think that also comes from leaving the job. I talked to him a little bit after the whole thing went down, and what I found interesting about his story is like just why he left. He was an Amazon guy. And I think people have to keep that one thing in mind. He liked his job. It was a job that you could have and pay rent and live a good life where he was living. Same thing with Bessemer. Those guys that work out there are making more money than they would make doing anything else. So, and also to the type of cat that you're working with in that environment. If you go back and listen to that interview, I had just quit working at the shelter at the same time, and we were talking about working with the same types of cats, fresh out the joint, a lot of guys as killers. You working with shooters, you working with maybe some ladies that were in illegal industries. It's hard. That's a hard group to unionize from the outside. But from the inside, it's a little easier to organize because the cat organizing you is from your environment. And I think a lot of people miss that when they're looking at Alabama.
And I just want to add, I'm not trying to be super down on the Bessemer people, but I think in terms of Bessemer, there was two, you're starting from a lower organizational base. You're in a society where there's being an extremely authoritarian war against trade unions and labor unions. You have a very sort of paternalistic social and political culture existing in that place, which is being foisted on people for the last 20 years. It's a lot harder circumstance to organize in. I think the problem with Bessemer was not so much the people necessarily on the ground, but people put a lot of emotional energy on a national level, and when Bessemer failed, people felt like it was game over.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, this victory shows that there is an ongoing struggle, because the struggle is not just taking place. It's not just what you hear on left media. There's like struggles taking place across the country. Some of them get more attention, some of them get less attention. But I think it's very easy to fetishize one particular struggle, and if it's unsuccessful, people become extremely demoralized. Whereas this shows that there's lots of things going on all the time, and we should not feel so defeated, especially in a circumstance. The circumstances that we're in now is Labor has an unprecedented advantage compared to what's been going on for the last 10, 15 years in terms of the great sort of resignation that's taking place. So this is a moment to strike and to organize, and I feel very positive about this victory. I think it's important that people don't turn this into a left drama. I think there is an incentive, both from, let's say, the AOC people and from the anti-AOC people, to try and turn this into a story of AOC good, AOC bad.
Well, let's not even bring AOC up, because let's just ignore
exactly.
it.
I mean, this is what it comes down.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, please.
No, just about the drama, because I'll be honest, I wasn't really on social media much yesterday. I saw there's the AOC stuff, and yeah, we don't have to jump into that. But was there other things that were happening, or did everybody just leave me alone? Were there other things that were going on between some people claiming victory who shouldn't have been claiming victory, or something like that? Because those were some of the weightier tweets and messages that I had seen out there, but I couldn't find out the source. So I'm just asking in general.
I mean, I'd seen some of it, but like basically, it's like I don't know, if, like it's just a lot of like.
Is it mainly AOC stuff, and it's just like how you feel one way about her was people were jumping in on that?
I mean, yeah,
because I saw a lot of people who were involved in the union movement basically being like, "Don't claim this as your victory if you didn't do it," and which is fine. Advice,
I mean,
but I was
look,
just curious who was doing that. Is what
Yeah.
I'm saying. I didn't know. I couldn't find the source of those like vague statements I was seeing.
I haven't also like everybody on the panel look into this deeply because I sort of think like, look, if like people like Chris are upset with AOC after a victory like this, they can air that, and AOC can take that. Frankly, even if you think it might not be like productive for what your immediate goals are, you got a W like this, you're allowed to say whatever you want in the victory lap. And then like, I mean, that's kind of how I feel about it. Like, there's certain, like, I don't think AOC is the biggest obstacle to progress or like some like CIA plant, but I also think like there's certain things that she needs to be pulled on, definitely. And this is a pull in the right direction, I think. And so like, and I think like certain maybe media people might overplay their hand on this front, and there's bad incentives to do that. But also, you know, it's like, again, like Marcus said, it's about real stuff. Like, this is actually like a real thing being mentioned. Right. So if all of a sudden the people who spite AOC turn all of their energies to like organizing Amazon warehouses, then we're in a much better place, frankly. And if they do that with AOC's help or just to spite AOC, those are still unionized warehouses.
Well, I want to trigger everybody on the panel. I saw this clip. Ken, I can't even say his name. It's like a fucking limerick. Ken Klippenstein posted
Kenny Clips
of Jim Cramer, who Ben Burgess let me know was part of the Spartacus Society. Djene Bajalan has
Spartacus, not Spartacus.
Hey, Spartacus. Sparty's nuts.
So what everything is about. It's the same case with Starbucks too. If you can't tell your employees when they work, and you're really not able to have much of an ability to be able to move product or move coffee, and I think that the unions will be in charge of time that you need to work, and that would be dreadful for very dreadful for Andy Jassy.
What? And that's just a U.S. picture, right?
Yeah.
They got Europe to think about as well.
You know, look, one of the problems was, Starbucks does indeed have unionized places in the ones that they franchise, but if you can't control the work rules, no one wants to work certain shifts. So you can just say, listen, I'm not going to work that shift, and Amazon would not be able to say, yes, you must work it. So that's what at stake with union is time that you have to work.
Our thanks to Dee. We're going to watch developments in New York
have more on
and
the
Alabama.
tech check?
I imagine we will.
Because she's doing amazing work. This is
God, that guy's so full of shit. Can I just say this right quick about Starbucks? Because one of the things that we're seeing, what is Starbucks doing to try to quell the unionization effort there? They're firing people because they've recognized that these people are in the union movement. And people are saying, I have full availability. Let me work the Saturday shift or the Saturday. I don't know what the hottest shifts are at Starbucks. I guess the morning, right? I'll work the Friday, 7 a.m. shift. And Starbucks is not scheduling people so that they can effectively fire them for because they're saying like, oh, we had to do hour cuts at the facility, right? Starbucks is doing the exact opposite, which is enforcing idleness. And we talked about this a lot on the program recently, right? Where, people who are unemployed, Marx calls this like the reserve army of labor. Like capital actually is the force that sort of pushes people into unemployment and underemployment, not lazy workers, right? There are people out there who are saying, I want to show up to my job at my Memphis facility. And Starbucks is saying, oh no, we're no longer going to schedule you anymore because they're trying to kick people out. So it's the complete opposite right now. If you're worried, basically, if you're just like a weirdo who's worried about like the efficiency of Starbucks right now, the biggest threat to an efficient, getting your coffee quickly is not the union effort. It's the corporate offices that are trying to push out people who are just trying to, push for their basic human rights of being able to be represented by a union.
Pascal?
So Jim Cramer was a former Spartacist?
Trotsky to neocon pipeline, baby.
Incredible, man.
He's a trot. The spots are the trottiest of trots.
It's a trot.
It's a trot. But a lot of the comrades ended up being quite good at business, because at the end of the day, Marxist economics is real economics. So they used to say in Turkey, all the comrades became good business people. But
watching Jim Cramer try to say that was hilarious. He's like, well, if they can't tell people when to go to work, nothing can get done. Nothing.
But it shows you the authoritarian bent within the capitalist class in the United States, that they are so brazen and open with their desire to utilize force to get people to work for them, to bully people into working. And they create, of course, this underclass ideology that serves to try and reinforce this narrative that people are lazy and you need to discipline them to work. And that is not 100% true. I mean, of course, there are always people who are going to try and get around the system, but the vast majority of people want to work. The people who are not working are the Jim Cramers of the world, who are living off rents and who are parasitical capitalists. I mean, there are capitalists out there who work hard to do their business and work extra hours, but the really big capitalists don't, because they're just living off rents, of shares, bonds, all this finance capital, which is just accruing interest. So it's those people who are the lazy people, not the working class people who are trying to make ends meet and who are trying to get a living wage. Because this is the other thing. People talk about, people not wanting to work. Well, people can't afford to take bad jobs. If you have kids, if you have other responsibilities, you literally can't afford to take a job that doesn't allow you to pay for your health insurance, that doesn't allow you to pay for your childcare. There's an entire sort of economic trap that exists in all developed countries, but that is particularly pernicious in the United States, that traps people into a cycle of poverty and dependence on state largesse, because if they go to work, they get all the support that they need to live taken away from them.
And I think it's probably important with childcare and even dealing with the Great Resignation, is that if you can't afford to send your kid to childcare, then what's going to happen? Then you stay home and you take care of the kid. And I mean, and the thing that's really crazy is that when you get even to childcare workers, the only way they can even afford to send their kid to childcare is for their kid to be at their job, and so what are you gonna do, right? And but God forbid that you do organize and actually get some demands on your time to make sure that you can even do an effective job. Because that's the thing too that no one wants to admit, is the fact that when people's material conditions are met, they're actual better workers. So it's even even from the businessman's perspective or whatever the fuck, it just doesn't work. Human beings weren't meant for this shit.
Well, let's address this super chat by Lyle Evans. Thank you very much, Lyle. What do y'all think was the difference between Bessemer and Staten Island? I know the count for Bessemer isn't over, but the count is much closer.
New York is not a right to work state. Very heavily unionized state.
Mm-hmm. Very heavily unionized state. Very heavily unionized state.
I mean, I think there's a few things that we should recognize right now, right? First of all, first vote in Bessemer, they lose by 1,000 votes. This one right now, it's something close to 100 votes between them, and there are around 420 or something like that challenge ballots that are going to be read and challenged by both the union and Amazon. So there's a margin there that it still could even, flip into a victory, or at least be much, much closer than we're already seeing right now. And again, 100 votes is very, very tiny margin. But to think about it from the other side, from people from Bama, you have to also remember, not only is there the tradition in New York of unions and things like that, but there's a lot of labor struggles that are happening in Bama. Warrior Met Coal has now just hit a very auspicious and unfortunate date, 1 year out on strike. And that is a very historic strike. And the complete failure of the Democratic Party in that state to show up for those people is absolute travesty and crime. Secondly, comparing Alabama to New York, it's like, yes, there's the income disparity, but let's also not forget when you don't have Medicaid expansion, right? For people who are on the cusp of these things, having access to healthcare like people get through working at Amazon is a very, very powerful tool. And I'm not saying that that's not a powerful tool in New York, but with so many people who fall through the cracks, working people, because, the Medicaid gap is absolutely ridiculous. Where if you're basically, if you're not making a very, very small amount of income, you won't be able to get healthcare. And then you don't really make enough to get any, kind of subsidy through Obamacare. Right. And when they did the interviews after the first round in Alabama, that was one of the number one things that people mentioned was that I didn't want to, I voted against the union because I was afraid that we might lose our healthcare. And I know a lot of people on the left, they hear that and they do this whole false consciousness, they're dupes, they don't understand the union is going to give you all these things. But if you see defeat after defeat, if you see people around you fighting for their livelihoods and the government and even frankly at times members of the community not standing up and winning those fights with you, it is a very frightening prospect to potentially see your life get worse, right? And again, being in a union is the answer to these questions, but the left really needs to get better at understanding that workers are not dupes, that they are rational actors, and they are looking at something that is very frightening. This is a powerful corporation that will do anything, as we've seen for the amount of money they've spent to break this. They very clearly broke the law, right? I mean, imagine that. They clearly broke the law and they cheated in the first union election. It's very, very reasonable for people to be scared that they'll do something again to them and take away people's health care, close down the facility, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that we don't organize and fight for a union, but we have to sort of move past this kind of armchair quarterback thing that people say all these people are stupid and they don't get it. They just see that, we're in a 150 years of massive defeat for the labor movement in this country, and people turn toward individual solutions for collective problems because they see that, they haven't seen collective solutions really work out, right? And our job really has to be to show people that politics, that union organizing and all that kind of stuff can change your life for the better. And I mean, you can get into the cultural stuff, you can get into the history, but fundamentally, that's brass tacks. That is a very, very powerful force that, corporations like Amazon have, is to be able to point, say look, it's not a sure thing that if you get this, that your life is going to get better. In fact, we can make it much, much worse. And we're going to show you that we probably will do that to you too.
Well, wait a minute, David. I think you just killed it.
Here it comes!
I think people
David, jazz hands for David.
people have a tendency to think of these movements as a single use bicycle or something like that. It's made of cardboard, so I'm gonna make it to work and then that's it. And it's raining, it's gonna get me one place. I got one shot at this, but that's not it. This is a battering ram. And it never gets the door down on the first strike. And even with Amazon, with being able to get this victory up in Staten Island, this isn't just a one-off. Oh, hey, this one thing happened in a bubble without any type of outside forces or history behind it. And so that'd be my advice, right?
And it's also important to understand something that this tells us about the nature of American capitalism. Liberals will often try and make the case that actually for the capitalist, universal health care, universal childcare, these are all things that would benefit the capitalist class, and in certain ways that they would, in terms of taking the responsibility of certain things away from the company, for example, providing health insurance and this, that, and the other. But the reality is they would rather pay for that health insurance in order to maintain that stick to beat down their workers with than have a more rational system. The gains of social democracy in Europe were not won purely because capitalists were actually, it's way more rational just to give everyone healthcare. We'll have healthier and happier workers who will come to work. No, it was won as a response to extended political struggle. There are capitalists, of course, who are sympathetic to those demands, but the political culture that pervades in the American capitalist class is extremely extractive. We have seen recently with the strike of the automobile workers that they're willing to take away people's health care, and taking away people's health care is a very powerful tool to control people. So when we fight, when we're fighting for healthcare, when you try and make the rational argument that, well, maybe if you have healthier workers, there'll be, it'll reduce your costs as a company. The companies, I think many capitalists, and we see this in the clip that you gave, want to maintain these kind of sticks in order to keep their workforce terrified and disciplined, and making the calculus that David was talking about, that, you know what, this all sounds great, but I can't risk losing my healthcare and my insulin because I could die.
Yeah, I mean, this is our favorite, one of our favorite topics on Left Reckoning recently. I mean, we talked about the John Taffer interview with Laura Ingraham, where they're talking about unemployment benefits and how everyone's too lazy to go out and get jobs. And Taffer brings up, I used to know a guy in the army, and they make dogs obedient by making them hungry. And he brought that up in the context of unemployment and getting people back to work in his fucking bars. And then there's that Applebee's email that recently went out too, where the manager's like, hey, this high gas price is actually going to be good for our application flow, which is like, that's the way that they, like David went into like the reserve army that Marx talks about, like that sort of like modern terminology for, oh yeah, this is good for us. Let's squeeze people a little bit more. Let's cut those benefits. Let's, remove those, child tax benefits or whatever. Let's get our application flow up so we can fire people we don't want and get some like new bodies in here to break them for our profit.
Guy was from Springfield, apparently, I think, the Applebee's executive.
Oh, really?
The Missouri guy.
So I dropped my daughter off at the airport. My daughter came to stay with me for a little bit here in Mexico. And as I was dropping her off at the airport, the gas prices in San Diego were $6.49 a gallon. And there was a front page in the LA Times that said Californians are getting gas in Tijuana because our gas is so much cheaper. So for the first time since I've been here for about 7 months now, they have the gas prices because it's liters. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's pesos, right? So now the gas prices at the cheap gas station by the freeway, it's in dollars and per gallon. It's $4.07 per gallon. I was like, Jesus Christ, this gas price is real.
You need to like have, instead of like the little Joe Biden, like I did this. Mm-hmm. Just like state-owned oil company did this.
Well, moving on, the main topic of the show, law enforcement. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially whenever I have to go back across the imaginary line to the U.S. Americans are quick to become outraged over the rampant corruption of law enforcement agencies in other countries. Prime example, the Sombra Negra in El Salvador, literally translated as the Black Shadow, a group of well-organized death squad groups that are composed mostly of police and paramilitary personnel, and which are infamous for the extrajudicial killings of known and suspected gang members, in addition to engaging in egregious criminal activity with impunity. In fact, the victims of the Sombra Negra are granted asylum in the United States based on the lawlessness of these death squads, as well as the failure of the Salvadorian government to eradicate them. And given that one of the bases of asylum eligibility is someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution based on past persecution or risk of persecution in the future as a direct result of that person's membership in a particular social group, wherein the persecutor is a government actor or a non-governmental actor that the government is unwilling or unable to control. However, Americans routinely and willingly ignore similar behaviors by thousands of law enforcement agencies across our own country. So why do we protect our own law enforcement agencies from engaging in constitutionally volatile behaviors Why are we allowing these men and women to quite literally maraud through our streets like the uncontrollable hordes of heathens from whom they purport to protect us, the citizens? Recently, I watched the first Mad Max. Matt and David, are you guys old enough to remember the first Mad Max?
I've seen it, but not enough to remember it, really.
In the first Mad Max, there's actually a police force. The director could not really afford to build out the dystopian future that you get in the second and third movies, Road Warrior and then Beyond Thunderdome. So they just kind of shoot it in the outback, and there's this police force that is pretty violent. And there's a scene in Mad Max where Mel Gibson's character is talking to his captain, and he says, "I think the only thing separating me from these horrible roving hordes of bad guys is the badge that I wear." And his captain, "But people need heroes." And Mel Gibson responds, "No one believes that shit."
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a serious, I'm not saying this to be a provocation, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've had about 5 or 6 years of anti-police homicide politics around Black Lives Matter. Okay. We had COVID, and in the wake of COVID, we've had massive crime rises throughout the country. And we're seeing in cities like New York, where we're having administrations come in, municipal administrations, that are excessively pro-cop in a period of reactionary politics. Understanding that police are pretty much a reactionary institution protecting capital. Doesn't that create a cocktail of a dangerous nature in terms of what we should be expecting in terms of police attitude towards citizenry after being, in their minds, persecuted by Black Lives Matter and anti-police sentiment, combined with the rising crime and combined with these administrations like the Biden administration is saying, don't defund the police, fund them more.
That was kind of my point for the piece that I'm still working on. And a lot of it actually started from watching Mad Max and thinking about that scene. I actually went back and watched the first 3 original films because I do believe that we are in a state of collapse. I know the Richard Wolfs of the world and the Chris Hedges of the world always talk about what is coming. I think we're kind of in the middle of it. And it definitely is affecting different parts of the country differently. Certain parts are seeing it worse than others. We have a bit of an unhoused problem here where I am in Baja, but it is nothing like what I see when I go across the line starting in San Diego, and then it definitely blows up in LA. And of course, we know what it looks like in the Bay Area. So this is a problem that has now gone from the urban areas and definitely stretched out really, really far into the suburbs, to the point where I'm seeing now encampments in areas that were literally just bedroom communities before. So as we see the overbidding of homes, especially on the coasts, that are pricing people out, we're seeing the blow up of Airbnb that is causing people to get priced out. We are seeing a rise in crime, but the clampdown on law enforcement and some of the articles I gave you guys, it is frightening to think that there are gangs within police. Now, we all know that there's bad apples, but to think there's literal gangs where your initiation is the murder of citizens should put fear in the heart of all of us. And it almost feels like it goes like with a shoulder shrug.
You know, I mean, I just wanted to add to that I think to have any conversation about like the rise in crime in the U.S., I think it is important to not fall into the trap of you know, I don't know, the political media cycle, because it's all about like defund the police versus funding the police.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing rise in crime across the board. And in fact, like some of the largest rises in crimes are in, you know, GOP Republican run cities.
That's correct.
Yeah. And I just think it's important that we not fall into the trap of missing that fact. And the second bit, and I'm really curious what y'all think about this, but you know, the second bit is that regardless of what you think about like defund the police as like an idea and in that whole movement when it was really, you know, taking off. What was really frightening to me, and this is basically what, you know, Jason was saying, but you saw the police departments across the country who are supposed to be an arm of the state or like an arm of like your local government, effectively saying, we're not going to listen to the mayor. We're not going to listen to the city council, and sort of operating, you know, under their own mandate, right? So, you know, adding all the murders and all that other kind of stuff, just like as a just basic question of democracy, you should be very worried about the fact that the people who are authorized to run around your town with guns and act on behalf of like the people, right? You know, basically have said, we don't want to listen to the government. We're going to do our own thing because the government is trying to undermine our like reason for being. And like, that's an extremely dangerous thing in any context, but especially in the United States of America, with the history that we have with the police.
Yeah, I mean, just one note on that: the line of police organizations, particularly like the Sergeant Benevolence Organization or cop union in New York here, where I think like the guy who was running the Twitter account's gone. I can't remember, but like just the amount of like we will say. Speak our reality into existence and beat protesters however we want to. Yeah, I think it's horrifying.
Well, how do we create a left politics that can really challenge police on an ideological level if we're actually dealing with a reality that both parties support the police state?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's a deeper discussion that people have to have with, you know, definitely cats that are in the environment that is getting fucked with by police the most, but also that have to lean on police the most. Where we're seeing a lot of things like car thefts. I believe I brought this up on the show. My daughter had her car stolen not too long ago, and when they found it,
wow,
dude was living in it.
Oh wow!
And the sad thing is, she ain't the only person I know in my immediate circle that got their car stolen recently. People were living in it. You know, we had a lot of cars that were stolen that people were living in when I was in West Oakland at the studio. It was kind of a common thing. So, and not every crime is a crime of economic precarity, right? But there is a reality that there's just so many have-nots now, and COVID really ramped it up. Really, really ramped it up. And
I mean, you're living in a. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
No, I was going to add to that. You know, we're living in a society, a huge country. Well, I'm in Britain at the moment, but in America, it's a huge country with these large urban areas which have gone through, you know, a real economic assault in the age of neoliberalism. And the reality is the response of the state, whether that's on the local level or on the federal level, has been to outsource social problems created by this economic decline to the security apparatus. So the security apparatus is increasingly deployed to solve social dysfunction in this society. And of course, even if you went to the police with the best of all possible intentions, you end up becoming ground down and angry at the people over whom you are dealing with. So you're dealing with this society in you know, collapse. The family institutions are in collapse. There's no jobs. There's no economic prospects. You end up with gang culture as a response to this economic decline. And the only response the state seems to have is to put more money into the security apparatus in order to keep those people at least out of the nicer areas of town. Because if you go to like a middle class town or neighborhood, people get on okay with the police. They don't have too many problems. The police are polite. But the American state basically asks the police to deal with all these social problems, which are a function of neoliberal capitalism,
Mhm.
and well, capitalism in general, because police have to maintain peace in a class society, but these social problems that have been exacerbated. So you don't build community centers; you just get people to beat up the troublemakers. You don't deal with addiction. You just get the police to shift the addicted people into somewhat less prominent, and you don't deal with homelessness. You just corral the homeless people into a particular area as well. So the way that the police are operating, and the kind of way that the police often begin to dehumanize the communities over which they are ruling, is a product of the fact that that's what they're being asked to do, whether it's overtly or covertly. That's that's what both Republicans and Democrats want them to
Well,
do.
if anyone who has not endeavored to do so, I really suggest people start to read the work of Loic Wacant and his trilogy on mass incarceration. He has a book, Punishing the Poor, and then he has the another book, The History of Underclass Ideology. I mean, look up his work. He really does a very good job of analyzing how the carceral state has a particularly utilitarian function in the age of neoliberal capitalism, and that the proliferation of mass incarceration that really starts in the 60s is definitely absolutely correlated to deindustrialization, and absolutely correlated to the fact that jobs are shifting, poverty is increasing, and it is no accident that these prisons are being built, and that the institutions that subsidize this were aware of these shifts, and particularly with the shift that we had from the liberal democratic Bretton Woods consensus from 44 to 71 afterward. This is a question I want to ask. I've been thinking about this for about 2 or 3 days, and it's got me in a bit of conundrum, and I really would like you guys to address this. If we're intellectually honest and realize the best that we were asking for with this last iteration of the left, social democracy, or the Sanders faction, was basically a return to the New Deal, Keynesianism. We were not going to get social democracy. Let's be absolutely honest. We were basically asking for Keynesianism.
Mhm.
If we admit that and we realize that the Keynesian consensus in that Bretton Woods period between 44 and 71 was built on United States monopoly control over geopolitical trade after the Marshall Plan, where you had no competitors until the 70s when Japan and Germany start manufacturing. How exactly are we arguing as leftists that we can even return to that milquetoast paradigm when the actual material realities of geostrategic trade are nowhere near that? And the United States is literally facing a multipolar world where China and Russia now are rising to challenge American geostrategic hegemony. How does the left advocate even something as tepid as Keynesianism, or God forbid social democracy, or even something like MMT, when now you have the Saudis talking about we're going to sell our gas in yuan. We get the Russians saying we're going to literally sell our gas in rubles. Doesn't this collapse like all of the shit we've been talking about for the last 5-6 years?
David?
No, I mean, there might be some tensions in there, but I mean, generally, I think that like this go back to the defund stuff, right? And like what the popular slogan was, defund the police, fund schools, defund the police, fund social programs, all this kind of stuff, right? We don't need we spend a shitload of money on policing in this country, and cities especially do that. But I think that there was a mistake that some people made with that argument, in the sense that even if you took the entire budgets that go to policing, that would not be able to fund these social programs or the schools. And I don't mean that to to be dour, but if you're not attaching that kind of radical demand to these like larger demands, and we can get to what Pascal was saying in just a moment, because I think it's an important point. Cities use the police because there are, there's there are issues in society that come from like mass exploitation and capitalism. What Jason was just talking about, people stealing somebody's car to sleep in it, right? That comes from capitalism, right? And the city, with the limited budgets and the people in control, do not really care at the end of the day about creating anything nicer. But they lean on police funding because, okay, well, if there's going to be issues and people are going to be upset because, their car gets stolen, somebody's sleeping in or something like that. The easiest and cheapest solution for the city, for the government to do, is to just put more police officers on the street to harass and sort of, aggravate these problems, certainly, and to over police them, clear up homeless encampments and all this kind of stuff, right? And it's not a solution in any kind of moral way. But if you are just a kind of, cynical politician who wants your, city to look and feel a certain way to the wealthier people who live in it, they're obviously going to lean on policing to sort of like fill that social gap that is caused by the system of like mass exploitation. And what was really worrying to me about, what happened with that movement was it immediately, like, first it comes from radicals and socialists who want to see a different kind of social order. But then it started to get into, just your kind of typical like SJW liberal who doesn't really have much more vision for society other than just like, I want to do I want to be the one who's saying the good thing, right? And like, we can't fall into that trap because you have to understand why the system uses policing to solve all of it. Again, it doesn't solve the problems, but to basically tamp down these tensions in society is because it's the cheapest and it's the easiest and it's the least threatening to capital. And if you don't start at that understanding, then you're going to fall into this trap where you can have a city like, Austin cut police funding dramatically, right? Mm-hmm. And, but we also have like a very, very kind of, it's liberal, but, a system of government here that really isn't going to do much to deal with the houseless, the housing crisis here. For fuck's sake, they gave Elon Musk, that bloated billionaire, millions and millions of dollars to build a non-union facility here. Instead of doing something to make sure that people who've been living here for 40, 50 years can continue to stay in their houses. Right. And, I understand that like we have all of these things that we have to tackle. And it's hard to say like we have to do everything at once. But like this is unfortunately the problem with like piecemeal solutions to these like large systemic problems is that, you can do something and then it just basically becomes something that the right wing can use to say, oh, well, crime, there's more crime or people are experiencing this or that in this community. This is because these crazy lefties, got their way with defunding the police. Right. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the answer necessarily, but I just think that like, at least for me, that's like a starting point for how we need to be thinking about this.
I think there's a few examples, and I mean, like we've talked about one at length on this show before. Let me get up above them. But one of those things is community control of the police, which, in Chicago, there's been like at least prominent efforts, but we could talk about what are the results. But then so that's kind of the thing of like if people start getting serious about the slogan defund the police, there are concrete community actions and organizing efforts that get towards the goal. And David makes a great point of like, hey, if you try to do a 1-for-1 swap on cop funding versus healthcare, housing, education, you're not going to get there. But at the end of the day, it's like we're already doing MMT, right? We're doing it right now. It just goes to Triton missiles and javelins and Winston crack. So we're already doing it. And the fact is making people realize like we're doing it like for the murder of us, the oppression of us, and also the oppression for people across the world, or just making CEOs rich, like Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, like when he's done, he's going right back to the board of Raytheon at a bigger pay grade. He's going to be carried on there in a golden throne because under his watch, the building on the military budget, and the same for the cop budget. And that's the thing is like, how do people really rectify the contradiction of the rise in crime, the ever crazier world that's coming around us, and the fact that we've been spending more and more on these things that are supposed to provide security, but they don't.
Well, I definitely want to get Bajalan's take on this, because Pascal did ask some questions that we've kind of yet to address on the global scale, and the United States kind of losing its hegemonic sway. Bajalan, what is your take?
I mean, I think Pascal raises an important conundrum. I mean, if you look at the global system, not just America but the West in general, has managed to accumulate an enormous amount of wealth through the exploitation not only of the working class at home, but also the masses of people in the global South, and that's just a fact of history. What we're seeing now, though, I don't know if that's a fundamental change in that global system. It seems more like a reordering of the system into a. I mean, if you look at the world, the United States is in relative decline, but is it in absolute decline? I don't know. America's military lead still is, a very serious military lead that gives it a huge advantage on the global scale. There are countries like China which are beginning to push back at American hegemony, but not entirely. It's not entirely all hostility from Beijing. Beijing grew wealthy on its trade with the United States. Beijing and China are, key in many ways to the global neoliberal order, providing these cheap products to the United States market in order to, so that people can survive in this increasingly difficult circumstances. So I think, and if we look at Russia, people are making a big song and dance about Russia, but what's the lesson we take away from Ukraine is that the Russian military had a pretty difficult time getting it, in Ukraine. It didn't have an easy role. So America's military position is still powerful. So whether we're going to see the end of American hegemony, maybe we're going to see America lose areas of the world to other powers. But I think America will still maintain a huge sphere of influence around the world, even if it's forced out of certain areas of the world. So the second question, though, is that, is social democracy viable? And I think that's a really important question. I think some level of social democracy, Pascal, I don't know if you agree with me on this, is clearly possible in the United States, right? At the moment, we could cut the military budget. You could pour money into a national health service. It would probably be cheaper. You could do a whole load of things theoretically that could create a more social democratic order in the United States, which would be about moving money around the budgets. The real question is that possible under the particular political and cultural regime that exists in the United States? And is that type of regime compatible with the continuation of America maintaining a major sphere of influence? And I think that's the problem when you come down to talking about building socialism in one country. You end up being possibly isolated and cut off at one extremes, or you end up with a social democratic order which is only possible through the exploitation of people in other countries. And obviously that's a conundrum that we have to deal with, and I don't think any of us have like a very clear answer to that. But I would say struggling, at least for social democratic gains within the American system, is a worthwhile objective. I think getting healthcare and a universal college and a public works program, a job guarantee, all those things I think would be positive things to happen in America. But obviously they have to be part of a broader critique of the global political order, and that's a very difficult thing to digest.
Well, let me ask this question to the panel. We're seeing some labor victories now with Starbucks and now Amazon. And Amazon may be the more frightening of the labor victories, as these are warehouse jobs, and Amazon being one of the largest companies in the world. Much like we saw in the 40s and 50s, as there were labor victories in unionizing farm workers in the 60s, we saw the breaking of that with the Bracero program. We saw the breaking of some of agricultural autonomy with Japanese internment. Is there going to be another rush of refugees, if you will? We have 100,000 potentially coming in on temporary protective status from the Ukraine. Is Joe Biden going to lessen the grip that his predecessors had on immigration, allowing more cheap labor to flow to crush these union movements? I mean, the meatpacking sector in the South at one point in time was pretty well unionized, especially with black workers. And when Reagan, with one stroke of the pen, crushes that in the mid-'80s.
You can't look at, you can't look at what's happening right now with policing without having the larger context. Like, we have to be Marxist, and I think it's unhelpful sometimes to talk about America at large, right? Because there's a class war going on in the society. And why is it that these corporations, why is it that, like, city budgets, for example, across the country, this is a universal experience, are falling, right? And as I said earlier, right, the cities use the police because it's the cheapest, weapon that they have in front of them to sort of break the contradictions of capital. Why do we have that kind of, dynamic? It's because the American capitalist class and the global capitalist class is completely dominating the state at this point. Look at what happens when Amazon wants to build a new facility. You have all of these different cities, basically embarrassing themselves on a national scale to say that they want to be the first people to have, the next big Amazon facility. Tulsa. So, Musk brought his factory here to Austin, right? But I don't know if I can share my screen. But if I can, Tulsa, has this big statue there of a woman, and it's very famous. You can think whatever you want about it. But they painted it like it's an iconic part of the city. They painted it with the big T and a Tesla over there, right? Of course, like, and if it was only this kind of symbolic thing, that'd be whatever. But it also comes obviously with millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in tax breaks, right? And what does that do for the city? It doesn't do very much in terms of, like, raising the standard of living for people there. And it certainly cuts into their tax base. And that is the norm, right? That is like what cities do now, is they compete, cities and states, competing with one another to lower the amount of money that the American capitalist class, the ruling class, has to pay out, to fund social services. So what Pascal opened up by saying, is that, like, looking at what's happened in, like, certainly there's a decline here, but there's also, like, a complete power shift that we've seen in this country in their favor. And certainly that doesn't help the average working person out. But they utilize this, and this creates so many of these social problems. And I hate to be, the guy who says, like, we have to think of everything at once, because obviously it makes it very daunting. But, like, you can't. It's really hard to isolate these kind of problems into, these kind of generalized conversations that I think a lot of liberals want to have when they want to talk about policing, right? What is in the soul of the police? What is in the soul of like, the mayor? Certainly a lot of those people have nasty ass souls, right? But I'm not a preacher. I can't condemn them to hell as much as I would like to. And I have to understand, like, why is there this incentive? Why is the system directing in this way? And going back again to what Pascal was saying, like, I can't say here with a lot of confidence that things are looking like they're going to get better. If anything, as you do see so many more people sort of being pushed out of the labor force entirely, we're working on, starvation wages, underemployed, essentially. You're going to see more and more need for the state to be even more brutal to people. And I think that is something that is extremely frightening, and we should take seriously. And we have to understand, though, like, where these things are coming from if we want to address them.
But what does that brutality look like? And I think that's my question.
Part of it's happening right now with like the fact that, like, we might be looking at another rise with the COVID wave, and, like, there's no funding. Like, it's not necessarily like a direct, like, someone with a boot and a badge stepping on your neck. Like, the absence of societal, like, just structures that keep people safe and alive being absent, that is what is causing, a lot of the things. And then, like, it just is kind of enforced with the police. And, I think increasingly so, like, National Guard is going to get used, which, I mean,
I mean,
there's a unionization effort, going back to unionization, but also with the state violence. It's like there was a unionization effort for Border Patrol, National Guard, agents, whatever the fuck, because they were getting paid, the same amount. They weren't getting state benefits and everything like that. And so, like, who the hell even knows what type of cracks in the structure that are existing that may be able to be exploited at some point in time. But I agree with David in saying it's going to get worse, and I think it's always worsening. It's been worsening, and
I mean, look
continue.
at the history of the United States. Look back to the 19th century, the way that state power was deployed against the labor movement in America. Look at contemporary articles. If you remember, Trevor Noah was yucking it up on his comedy show about South African security forces executing miners in South Africa. So we can imagine what this kind of violence was looking like. In America, we see most of this violence is directed against sort of criminal elements or people who are breaking the law. In other countries, it's more it's focused on those people, but also political movements as well. So we might see, like in the 60s, a more violent face of the police towards political movements trying to change things. But we ultimately, I think if we look at the way that liberals took on police reform, and I think David spoke to this, is it just comes down to like liberal PMC petty bourgeois idealism that everything is a psychological problem that can be individualized. And so, if you just do the appropriate amount of training of racial sensitivity, which just happens to hire a bunch of university graduate people of color to conduct those trainings, you can solve the problem. So it comes retraining the police to be nice to black people, while they instead of using the N-word when they're kicking their heads in, they kick their heads in saying, "Excuse me, sir." You end up with you have this whole new opportunity structure taking place, and that's where the police reform movement goes. At the end of the day, if you go to St. Louis, the people in North St. Louis are not asking for the police to be abolished, right? They're asking for the police to function properly, to make sure crime, is dealt with, because these people they don't solve the crimes, do they? Like there's all these crimes taking place and the police aren't solving them. And to treat people with humanity and respect. I think defund the police was a kind of political dead end in many ways, because the problems that the police are dealing with are problems that people want dealt with, and the only way that you can deal with this problem is not by defunding the police, but by dealing with the economic and social problems that cause those things to happen in the first place. And that's by compartmentalizing it. That's what liberal police reform has done. It's turned it into an opportunity for all these race sensitivity training people to get paid.
And it's also bringing reactionary results from the police in the first place, because they resent that crap anyway. But I want to pivot to something that Jason is working on, because I think it's something that's very important in terms of actually saying we are in a state of collapse. And I don't think he's wrong with that. And my position is that, are we really in a position where we really don't have the solution to the current problem, and all we're waiting to do, whether we're leftists or whatever you want to return we to refer to us, is do triage after everything falls apart?
Let me say this, and I'll again shut up after I say this, and I definitely want to hear Matt's opinion on this, because especially since he lives in New York City. I called in the Majority Report a little while ago, and I got to talk because there was a guest you guys had who actually had some interesting things to say about addiction and that whole world. And he said some things that kind of shocked me, because like that's not how that world looks at all. and I called in to push back a little bit on what he said, because there is a reality to safe injection sites, needle exchange, and even the idea of housing as the overall answer. And in Los Angeles, and I don't know if I sent you guys this story because I think I sent you more police stories than stories about the unhoused. There's a few activists that kind of push back for people to go into some of the hotel shelter housing because the hotel shelter has rules and they have curfews, and they're not perfect. And also, housing is a complex situation because a lot of people that are what is called in the industry chronically homeless have been institutionalized for a long portion of their life, and to put them alone in a house probably need to give that person some mental therapy, some help to live alone. I've seen, and this is all anecdotal, I've seen women go back into abusive relationships when they get housing because they're scared to live alone. I've definitely seen a lot of people walk away from housing because it would cause them to move away from a support system that they feel they have in their community. So the answers, I think, are a little more complicated. And especially when we talk about needle exchanges, I'm not against them by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't see them as the pure answer. It's just triage. And I feel that sometimes people that aren't in that world that really have to deal with that population look at a lot of these triages as these simple and sole solutions. I don't know if New York has any safe injection or anything like that, and I haven't been there since 2019, so I don't even know what the city looks like anymore. Can you give me like your take on what's going on in New York City, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, the thing, I'll just say, like, we talk about how we're exposed to, I know somebody who's working retail, and the type of things you're exposed to just on a 8-hour retail shift, the amount of deprived people and people trying to figure out like how they can get out of Target with diapers. And it's very traumatizing. Yeah, as far as like, I was thinking about like Pascal's question about like what can be done about that, like, and it does feel like the political class particularly said we're not going to do any of that stuff. But there's like very recently in the Trump administration, they did start throwing checks out the door in a way that briefly showed some sort of promise that like got people out of poverty briefly, and then Joe Manchin said, I don't like an entitlement mentality, so we're going to let that sunset. And so like I guess for me it's like it's a hard question because I do feel like we're probably limited by what Pascal's saying in terms of like the overall history. But it's also like you look around, you see all these giant pinatas full of money in these like buildings like run by capitalists, like just or put up by capitalists. Like the entire skyline's changed in the 10 years since I've been in New York. It looks like Dubai now. And it's like, what are those? I grew up in North Dakota, so like a skyscraper. The first thing I did when I got the internet was went onto this website called Emporius, which is the internet skyscraper database. And you can just look at the tallest buildings in any city because we don't have a lot of tall buildings. So I was obsessed with it. And it to me, it seemed like that's modernity. That's the future. That's like society. And it's places that have buildings like that. And now, like at this point in my life, it's like, no, those buildings don't represent that at all. It's hubris of capitalists often. They all have like banks that aren't going to be around in 10 years. Or it's, and like, I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, but it's like when you see that kind of money around you, there's got to be some way to like spread that around in a way that creates some sort of like positive movement. Even like globally, it's like, look at like what's the big international obstacle right now to any kind of like solidarity with regards to the pandemic. It's this IP and knowledge transfers because all this stuff is ran by the most evil companies in the world, the farm, and who have gotten massive PR benefits out of this. If we were able to just remove their like grasp on medicine, that would have positive effects for the entire globe. So I guess that's a long way to say of like like I'm worried about what Pascal's worried about, but it's also like, Donald Trump's kids are running around, going to cocaine parties in fancy luxury apartments, right? So it's like there's stuff we can shake down and get to people.
This is a big country. I mean, America is a big country which is well endowed with natural resources, that has an enormous amount of human capital. There's a lot that can be done with the wealth that exists in the United States. A lot of it is derived from exploitation overseas, but there's a lot of industry, there's a lot of human effort and endeavor that is being wasted in servicing the needs of the rich, right? We're going towards an economy where, in the past we had servants. Now we don't have servants. Now you're going to be able to have an app where you can have a servant, right? Where you de facto have servants. So I think there are things that can be done with the vast, human wealth in America and the vast natural resources in America that could go to improving people's lives without, like America's big. Unlike, for example, Russia in 1917, which was 80% peasants with very primitive agriculture. America is a modern industrialized country that can produce all kinds of food, that can produce all kinds of industry. So I think America could do a lot. The economic and technological base of America could be a good foundation for a more just political global order. It's just that apparatus has to be taken over by people who are not driven by capitalism.
Can I just say, because going on about what Pascal was saying about the limits of social democracy. There's a few things that I think are worthwhile looking. Is like, I think, okay, you can look at America between 1950 and 1970 and compare that to today. When we're talking about this decline, we're talking about decline in like the living standards of like average people, right? The return on capital investment, you have started to see some declines, which is why globally, corporations have had to outsource so much of their labor because they need to, go wherever they can, reduce people's wages as much as possible. But dropping all that aside, the thing with the Bernie movement, like, God love him, like Bernie Sanders, I think that was a very useful moment in the history of the American left. Mm-hmm. But I make this point a lot because I do find where we're at right now as a movement, when you're seeing all the fragmentation and all that kind of fracturing that's going on, that's super devastating. What's really frustrating to me is I don't think folks took that challenge seriously enough on a material way. And what I mean by that is, like, Bernie said this, he would say this all the time. And he had the right analysis, was like, if I get elected, we're going to have to be able to have social movements that can, show up in the streets and to develop and to pressure the government, because Bernie understands the inner workings of the state, understands that they were going to be completely hostile to even, however we want to frame it, his, kind of just basic Scandinavian social democracy in the US, right? And he said that time and time again, which I think was the correct analysis. What's so frustrating is that the effort to build that capacity was extremely limited, right? So it's like, you had the right analysis, which is like, if we win, we're going to have to, the revolution starts when we get power, the revolution starts when we're in the state. But there was no real serious building of that kind of capacity. There's a lot of education now. People think Medicare for all is good, and that's great. But like, there's that and this is like, again, as socialists, like, this is the second level work that we have to do, is to say, hey, we can have all the right ideas, but you need to understand that the state does not operate in this kind of neutral way that I think a lot of Americans sort of consider it to be, where you can just come in and, you have your good guys in there and things are going to change. Like, no, it's the opposite, obviously, because Trump wasn't trying to do anything particularly radical. But I think, look at Donald Trump, right? When he was president, there's all this, oh man, Donald Trump's the president, he's going to do all this crazy ass shit. And, things like, it might be bad, but maybe it will disrupt stuff enough. And look what happened during the Trump administration. It was like autopilot GOP politics, right? And a lot of that is because
flair,
that benefits Trump. Yeah. I mean, it benefits Trump, but also because, like, the state does operate under its own kind of logic, right? The state, like, and you need to understand that, like, there's a site of struggle there that I think is completely obscured for the vast majority of people who sort of consume or think about politics in this country. And, you know, Bernie had the right analysis, like, we have to build a movement that can challenge it. But I don't think people took that any more seriously than a kind of rhetorical flourish of like, not me, us kind of thing.
Well, I mean, it's easy to, you know, go to a Public Enemy or Strokes concert, have a good time, you know, maybe vote, and then, you know, hope that like that's all you got to do. But yeah, no one took that seriously. And you know, and this thing too is like even the campaign, you know, that it really wasn't the goal of the campaign to build a sustainable movement. You know, the goal of the campaign was to get Bernie Sanders elected, and once that was done, that's it and that's all. You know, and something that I've, you know, like my brilliant, you know, idea to like that, you know, like going back, oh, hey, this would have been great, is if they actually tried to make certain campaign offices permanent, to say, hey, when we're organizing, you people need to carry this on as an organizing office, as a place in the communities that people look to where we can even project a voice, right? Even just projecting a voice of these are our solutions, you know, and that's something that can, you know, they can be done at any point in time. But yeah, you know, that's looking back, and who knows, right? If we ever get a chance like that is ever going to happen again. But I think this is where just having mature people who are actually going out in the community, you know, there's a myriad of things that need to happen in order for us to, like, if there's any chance of staving off fascist takeover / climate crisis apocalypse. But if we do even end up just trying to pick up the pieces off of some catastrophe, the work up to that is the same. You know, you organize your workspaces, you try and educate people on what the hell's going on, and you hope you don't get hit by a car walking across the street.
Let me bring this up to be difficult as usual. Organizing workspaces in an environment where we are growing increasingly separated by gig economy jobs is extremely difficult. And when we say gig economy jobs, we don't just mean Uber, Lyft driver. You're talking about like Pascal or Djene, I can't remember who was talking about the servants, but that's a real thing. You know, definitely there's apps where you can have people clean your place. There's literally apps where people will come in with your laundry and put your clothes in the drawer. In San Francisco, we have apps where people drop off your groceries.
I'm sorry, Jason, but I just have to say that, like, there's such like an infantilization that comes out of Silicon Valley. Like, these guys really just like want mama to be like taking care of.
They're not reinventing anything.
For them.
As someone that worked there as a contractor, they're not reinventing the wheel. But there's also jobs like brand ambassador jobs, which are prevalent in major cities like New York, LA, and San Francisco, and definitely in Austin has a shit ton of these things called brand ambassador jobs, where you get paid anywhere from $20 to $30 an hour to wear a branded T-shirt of a company and hand out free shit. And there's people that definitely pay their rent doing these types of jobs. But
you get a diplomatic passport.
What'd you say?
You get a diplomatic passport.
It's not much different.
It's harder to think of organizing because we're so individualized. So how do
is it just the gig economy, Jason? Wouldn't you say there's a trend to this in, for example, like the service sector? Like, organizing in a huge factory is one thing, but when you have like 20 different McDonald's in the city, that's a lot harder to organize people. Might not be the same level of difficulty.
They all don't have the same boss. That's another thing we have to keep in mind.
But there's
corporate stores.
Yeah, but you could look to Vegas. See, the thing is, though, is like we have examples of things that at least can work. You know, and so like when you talk about like
push back on that and say that started as a mob town, and that's a whole different level of structure.
I mean, but the thing is, though, is can organizational structures be replicated? You know, and this is things like
if it's a different beast.
Okay, but if you ask, is it possible for service industry sector to work for different bosses but still be able to organize? You could say yes. Is it going to be difficult to make those things happen? And that's the too. It's like these things are more possible in places like New York, LA, where you do have it densely populated, and it's just like sheer volume can help. But the truth is still the same. The truth that we're dealing with of workers organizing together, having the power, that doesn't go away just because certain industries or certain locations change. And that's what I'm saying. Like when it comes to Chris Smalls, we talk about Bessemer, like it just comes down to keeping at it. It's the battering ram.
But there's a unified person that is a bad guy you can point to. When you work a brand ambassador job, the person that just handed you the fucking t-shirt is so far removed from the main corporation that you're handing shit out from. You don't care. You just want your check. So if you're getting treated like shit or if you're getting treated well, you don't care because you're going to go on to the next job. Much like Uber and Lyft drivers, right? Who's the big? Do they even know who the CEO is? We yell out Jeff Bezos' name so fucking much on this show. Who knows the CEO of Uber and or Lyft or DoorDash? Does anyone know?
Well, I mean maybe if you're talking about, hey, if there is an organization of leftists that is actually going after a workspace, maybe the gig economy ain't it. Maybe just don't worry about the gig economy.
That's where most of these jobs are.
But that's the thing, like if you already deal with Teamsters, USPS,
get it out, Marcus.
I think that like look at Uber. I mean, look, I think you have to understand a few things that like the gig economy, right? It has the advantage for their class because people are extremely atomized, right? You're not showing up to a hall at the end of the day to talk to other folks. And also, I think that people need to understand that it doesn't mean that it's not exploitation. But if you gave most people the choice, would you rather be able to, even if you're limited in your capacity, set some form of your own schedule, things like that? Like people prefer, even if that means making a little bit less money potentially, that system over, right? And understand that when you're going in there to have those conversations. But like they're still interacting. They're basically having to sell their own vehicle, right? On a marketplace where the price is set by Uber or Lyft, right? And those prices change dramatically. I mean, we've seen this since those prices have started to go up, that basically they undercut the competition to completely evaporate the taxi industry. And now they're jacking them up while workers are not getting the benefit of those higher prices. They see how much the guy's paying, for you to drive them 15 minutes down the road. But they see that their share is diminishing. And you've seen pretty, exciting movements in Los Angeles and in New York to like grow a union there. And I think like I take your point about the atomization, but like people are interacting with that structure every day and they understand it. They get that, there's something funny going on when they're seeing all of like, why am I paying some, corporation, some kind of faceless algorithm or whatever? I mean, they always do like to depersonalize it like that. But people recognize that kind of exploitation. I think the challenge is less like helping people understand it, but the second is like going back to everything. It's literally getting people the confidence that doing something about it rather than just sort of dealing with it as an individual will be the solution. And it's like there's not an easy answer for that other than winning, frankly. But that's where people's heads are at. I would argue more than anything. It's not like people are unaware of these things because they might not know the CEO of Uber. They interact with that platform every single day. I mean, there's a reason that they like this kind of atomization.
But there's Prop 20, and that really hit California hard. And I learned a very valuable lesson because let me real quick, Djene, I'll say this. I want to be real brief about this. That union push that you saw out of Los Angeles and even San Francisco of Uber and Lyft drivers got us AB5, which part of AB5 was that you got to look at these guys as employees. And the pushback originally for AB5, you know where that came from? The original propaganda pushback? You guys are going to laugh at me. Musicians and bar workers. Because there's so many people that go work. You're just a sound man at bar X, right? You make $100 for the night or whatever. And the propaganda was the sound man now has to get health care. So bar owners were against it. Then there was the bands that show up and play have to get health care with this AB5. It was never true. The engineer that engineers your record has to get health care. None of this shit was true. But there were so many people that were part of the service industry and gig economy that pushed back, even against AB5, which still passed. The amount of millions that Uber and Lyft poured into Proposition 22 to even dismantle this kind of flimsy regulation that just said you have to recognize these people and they can't unionize. They still pushed back, and you get Prop 22. And they're trying to do it in New York. The day it happened, I got an email from the CEO of Uber, and he said, congratulations on our victory, and we're going to replicate this in major cities throughout the country. You're seeing Airbnb just recently said we are declaring war on the 100,000 cities that we are in because we don't want any sort of taxation or limitation. Wrong black guy. That nigga's got hair. Whoever did that should feel ashamed of himself. That was probably Djene's ass. I'll blame it on your sickness. No, you should be ashamed of yourself for that one. But seriously, I just want to add that while we did see some organization efforts, the pushback was so massive. The propaganda was so massive. And I feel that the difference is that Chris was in the trenches and was talking to people in the trenches. There's a different conversation in the trenches of drivers. And a lot of it has to do with, not all drivers speak the same language. There was one place in Oakland. I was driving while I was doing this show. When I first started, I was driving a DoorDash. There was one place we all parked at, this parking lot not far from the Oakland airport, across from the Oakland Coliseum. Real sad place. There wasn't only like a couple other people that I would sit around actually spoke English. There was just a cacophony of languages. It's hard to have those kind of galvanizing conversations when you're cut off. What are the solutions to this is it's not that having a online or in your phone in your hand taxi service isn't the answer. But really it's like building a structure that just doesn't have the profit motive, that makes sure that people have the benefits they care of, right? And that's things that we talk about all the time. We've got a bunch of leftists, don't have a left. If there was if there is a left organization that could say, hey, what are we doing next? Oh, well, we're going to buy a shit ton of servers. What are we doing? NFTs? No, we're making a ride sharing app on our own. And people can do multiple. You can be on Uber and all the other ones and be on ours. And it's gradually trying people to move over into something that's actually just equitable. I don't, but can we do that right now? No, we can't.
Yeah, because they tried that in New York and it didn't really work out.
Gene, what did you say? I'm sorry.
I need to say something. I knew who the CEO of Uber was.
And you did not.
He's called Dara Khosrowshahi.
Yeah, because he's Persian.
He's a fast man. He has the same name as my brother, and his name is Khosrowshahi. He's a very nice man. But I have to say, with all these things, it's like capitalism brings up contradictions. On one level, the new economy, whatever you want to call it, is leading to atomization, is breaking apart old systems, disrupting, as they call it. A lot of the time it's criminality, but the outcome is the same. You end up with the disruption of older economic systems and older systems that were working, like with the taxes and stuff. But that technology, as Marcus was saying, that technology could be used for good, right? You could use your apps and things. You could conceive of using it in a more egalitarian and fair way. And also, this new technology gives opportunities, new ways of organizing, using online, using telephones, using mobiles. It's the same with the media. As much as we dog in on the left media sphere from time to time, at the same time, it is a place where you can actually hear a point of view that is different from what was getting rammed down your throat by CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all those things. Like the internet, on one hand, is a methodology to control people, but on the other hand, it has sort of emancipatory aspects to it. So I guess, our responsibility is to find the ways that these new systems and these new technologies created by capitalism can be used to subvert capitalism. And the other thing is, I guess we need to have a left that is more working class. We have all PMC debutantes, but no working class gentlemen for the ball. We need a firm, grasping proletarian hand, because that the whole new left stuff about minorities and students being the revolutionary subjects is just proved to be nonsense, because all those people just end up being reincorporated into the system in new and perverse ways. The strategy still has to be based on the working class. And the question really comes down to, do we have much hope for the working class in the United States, both in the sense that it's so demoralized and disorganized that it can't seem to fight, and at the same time that it has benefited from imperialism so that it's wedded to the American state? Those are questions I don't know. But if we don't think we can do anything about it, well, why don't we all just stop doing podcasts and just get money and do something that pays better?
I don't know, Djene. I'm so rich.
Living the dream.
We interviewed a while ago Marshall Steinbaum, and Matt might be able to break this down a little bit better. But one of the things is I can't remember the name of the group, Matt, but it was that group from Harvard.
Harvard Clean Slate, the Clean Slate Initiative. Yeah, and it was this whole thing hey, remember how all these different classes of workers were left out of the New Deal era labor reforms? That was bad, right? We all agree that was bad. Well, rather than going back and repairing that damage and including them in those labor reforms, we're going to set up this new special version of a labor classification just for them, and that will repair all that damage. And it's much less than, I forget what the differences were, because it's last year that we covered this, but the same sort of thing where it's probably no collective bargaining and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's effectively employee councils.
Yeah.
So you got a guy who maybe has lunch every once in a while with the boss, and that's the new modern union that will be without the exploitation of the 40s and 60s.
And it was creepy to see it, to say all the things that say lefties say about the New Deal and how it left out certain class of people because of the Jim Crow contingency in the South. And it's yeah, all that stuff is true and bad, and we should just go back and protect those people.
Well, there's a long history of it, isn't it? Of reincorporating the language of emancipation and liberation and putting it to the purposes of neoliberalism, right? That's not, I forget the article, but James Smith from the Popular Show podcast mentioned an article which I went and read, which talked about how, the language of women's emancipation ended up being reincorporated into neoliberalism in order to create an even more brutal and exploitative system. You fight the patriarchy, and now, as a woman, you're expected to do all the social reproduction, but you need to have a career and a job as well. So you end up being guilted into, you don't deal with any of the fundamental structures. You just put an extra responsibility on people and tell them that's your emancipation and that's your liberation, and you better enjoy that, otherwise you're ungrateful. And then people wonder why you see this neo-traditionalist discourse prevailing, because people are this is nonsense. I am being forced into a career, but also I have to look after my kids. What the hell's going on? This is I think this is exactly what you're talking about. The way that neoliberal ideology in these days just reincorporates so much discourse of emancipation and just flips it on its head in order to attack working people.
Even I'm sorry to make a sports ball reference, but I mean, they had "End Racism" on the back of their helmets in the same year where this controversy around black coaches happens. You know, these things are happening at the same season. You know, so like it's yeah. You know, I don't know.
Well, speaking of black coaches, we've been talking for 2 hours. I'm sure it's
You're
late where these boys
you're my
are.
black coach.
Am I your Denzel?
TMI traps. TMI.
Well, look, hey, I want to say this before we sign off with our co-streaming co-host today. I saw a little bit of the chat. There seemed to be a dust up cross streams where people were bitching about other leftist podcasters. I recently did a video essay called "We Don't Need Another Hero" about the idea of hero worship in this circle that we're in right now. What I've always wanted to do with this show is something that I got to do with my music career, which was
not be famous. Oh, sorry.
Not be sorry.
It was too easy. It was too easy. All right.
Still be broke. But seriously, what I've always tried to do is I got to have conversations with people in various parts of the country, especially in what we call the flyover states or the red states. I spent way too much time in North Dakota. But really hearing people's complaints about their material conditions, for whatever reason, people always used to want to come up to me and talk about it. And I do understand people's fascination and need for a hero. I think this country was built on hero worship. But one thing I think we should think about when we get into these very, very petty arguments about what show one likes and what show one thinks is full of shit is we're trying to have a conversation here about real problems and how we're going to solve them. No one on this screen has the answer. That's why we're discussing this.
Speak for yourself.
We're discussing it with you guys, the viewing audience, so we can try to figure this out. So let's put these petty beefs aside. Let's maybe look at how we view even shows like this. We try, right? We try. No one is perfect. We try. But let's put the hero worship aside. If someone likes some show, that's fine. Let's not have petty arguments in the chat over shit like that. It's just
the thing is too is that like anybody, you know, and we talk about Jason, you know, like this is something we have a conversation off air a lot about, like actual organizers and what they have the time for. Coincidentally, not a lot of podcasting and TV, internet shows.
Not a lot of podcasting. Not a lot of.
No,
can I just
weird. But it's like, that's the thing. Is like no one knows. No one that needs help knows who the fuck these like any of this is. No one cares, right? This is like it's use of it what you can. If you find entertainment value, right? If you used to watch like professional wrestling, but it's like it's a little too violent. I just want to watch people do it verbally. Go watch Debate Bros, whatever the hell. I don't like it. Really doesn't matter. If you can do something in the real world that's helping to advance these goals, and that doesn't necessarily mean outside of a computer, right? There's a lot of people who can do a lot of things, you know, but it's got to be materially effective, right? And if it fails, guess what? You learn, you move on, right? But I agree. But that's also like lame, Jason. You need to do the wrestling, you know, taking shots, calling people out, put on a luchador mask.
We should Pascal should debate people, but I don't think they could handle him. But he should debate serious people.
Who's serious on the left?
I hate. Look, I'm drinking out of a coffee mug right now. I'm drinking out of a coffee mug right now that has rap albums from the 80s, rap cassettes from the 80s. If I really want to see like people talk shit and then get punched, I will go to a hip hop battle.
You go watch the Oscars.
Yeah.
I don't want to see two assholes talking about nothing and no one's going to get punched.
Speaking of that, before we roll, I do have to ask, has anyone got any hot takes for Duke UNC tonight?
Oh, shit.
I'm saying Duke, Kansas.
Nigga, what? Matt Leck.
I mean, I was a North Carolina fan growing up. I hated Duke. Still kind of don't like Duke, although, I don't know. I usually follow players, and Duke's been getting a lot of good NBA talent the last 10 years. But I'm going for North Carolina, of course, because it's underdog, and I think UNC is just cooler as a
That
school.
was my first poster. 82.
So MJ one or which
Yep.
one?
Yep.
That
was my first. That was next to, and then my dad got me Tony Dorsett.
I think I even had that North Carolina poster. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my first poster. My dad would be like, look at all these James Worthy's a professional, Michael Jordan's a professional. I was like, all right, I get it, motherfucking North Carolina.
Oh yeah.
My room all hyphy like that.
I think Duke's gonna take it just because it's all about storylines and narratives. With Coach Kirieskashiv's
By the way, you do forget about your silly American sport. In a real sport, which is called football, where you actually kick a ball, England are in a World Cup qualifying group with Iran and the USA and possibly Ukraine.
I was thinking when that draw happened, the takes that will happen in the New York Times, New York, if the United States has to play Ukraine, and like all the MSNBC people just like losing their fucking mind about who to cheer for, it's actually going to be quite embarrassing.
I imagine the people drawing it like, oh my god!
It's Iran. Iran's going to be. Remember when Iran beat America in I think it was the '96 World Cup.
You do.
The whole world was like, "Yeah, take it, take that, America."
That's awesome.
Take that. They were like, I just remember, like my Chinese friend was like, "You see America lose?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Dude,
I was like, the whole world was like, root. Everyone was like, everyone vaguely connected was from Iran. I was like, actually, my grandmother was from Iran. We beat the American pig dogs. It was a beautiful moment. But hopefully, England will come last. I'll be hoping for that. And definitely Iran number one. No, America come last or England come last.
I don't think there's any chance that there's no chance that England's coming in under the U.S. I don't think.
Don't
underestimate. If it was the women's football, yeah.
Oh,
the
that's
American
a whole
women's
world.
team.
That's a whole
they're a really good team, man. They're a solid team. They got a good ground. Anyway, sorry to ruin your football with real football.
We were talking about basketball.
It's all the same. It's all the same. He doesn't care.
I'll remind him. I'll remind when you get back to Missouri. I'll remind those boys that you think soccer is football. They'll be sure to kick you in the nuts.
Yeah.
How about them footballs? Forward ball? We got this fancy talking Mexican over here telling us what football is. Hey, fancy Mexican.
You say that, but whenever I'm at Chicago Airport, there's always some old Spanish-speaking lady who comes up to me and starts talking to me in Spanish because she can't find a gate, and I'm like, I'm just sorry, I'm not. You rolled the dice, but no luck.
Yes,
welcome to the experience, Djene.
My daughter had people speaking Spanish to her. She just kept staring at me like it was.
Did she have a good time? Did she enjoy it?
Time, but she definitely just stared at me like it was my fault. I was like, I'm sorry. I mean,
wait, can I get a timeout though? Because we're being a little bit disrespectful to David. Dave, did you want to give your take on who you think's going to win the UNC Duke game? I feel like we've gone a long way from there now.
Oh, it's okay.
But
I mean, I think Duke's going to win. And if you don't want to see Coach K again, you should be cheering for Duke, because I promise you, if Duke loses in the Final Four, Coach K is going to come back for another season.
He'll Brady it.
We're living in the era of false retirement, and I can't imagine that Coach K. You can see in his face he'll be coming back. I promise you. If they lose this kind of Cinderella story
to North Carolina, that'd be so funny.
That is a good point.
Yeah, it's so funny.
And then Kansas is going to have the edge too. So it'll be Duke, Kansas in the final.
Duke
basketball lovers dream. College basketball lovers dream, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, Duke, Kansas in the final, or North Carolina, Kansas in the final is
Yeah.
the NCAAs, and who's doing it? Is it CBS or Fox? Who's doing the
Oh,
program?
I don't know. I never follow that. I always just go on some weird local news site before the game and what channel is it on? You're like reading, like, I don't know, somewhere in Illinois, like their local news channel.
That is going to be fucking just it's gonna rain down. It's gonna look like a rap video from the late 90s.
Man, I'm actually thinking, like, what would happen? Like, what would Coach K do if they get stomped by UNC? And then, like thinking, like, putting, like,
you can't rescind you can't Tom Brady it. You can't.
Oh, you can't. You
There's
can't.
a funny thing that's happened here locally. Eric Church, who's like a pretty mid-tier shitty country music singer, was supposed to be playing a show in San Antonio this evening, and he canceled the show to watch the Duke UNC game. And people are pissed, like so mad about this. It's
Where
the
in
worst
San
thing that's
Antonio
ever
was he supposed to
happened.
play?
What?
At the dome or the football stadium?
Sorry, what?
Was he playing at the,
Where was he
at the
playing?
football stadium?
I don't know where he was playing in San Antonio, but I know that he canceled like last minute, and people are not very happy.
Damn, you don't mess with Texas like that.
Sorry, motherfucker. I got to watch the game.
I mean, it's probably good. I think if his star falls, that's a good thing for the music. But
Well, thank you guys. Before we go, Left Reckoning airs on what nights?
Wednesday, 7 Central, and catch. I do these little live chat streams Tuesday usually. Sometimes I do them Thursday afternoon, but keep your eye out for that.
And do you have any new articles in Jacobin or anywhere we can read anything?
I don't have anything coming up, though. There is something in the pipeline, so
Like
I
a
might
book?
have that in the future.
A book? We can't.
No. I want to work on it. I want to do some stuff, man, about the environmental movement here, because it's getting really silly really quickly. And I think people need to start taking this a little bit more seriously than just sort of shouting out green energy, and start actually thinking about what that would look like.
How do they shout green energy in Texas? They go, hey, baby, you want some green energy, baby?
You know, I'm sorry. Austin is filled with liberals with those little, in this house we believe shit, and they can't think of anything.
I live in that neighborhood, and I just want to kick those signs down. Well, now that I have tenure, I can go kick those signs
That'd be
down.
No.
Douchebag with
believe all
fucking-
humor. I don't believe any of this stuff.
See, that's what's nice about being in this part of Virginia, is that you see the signs, except they're bumper stickers for people parking in the General Dynamics and Raytheon, joint corporate board meeting. But then if I drive south an hour, I've got, Trump and build the wall. It's just a great mix of culture.
I literally live near the wall. I got to pass the wall when I go across the border.
You should put one of those stickers on it then.
In this country, we believe.
You need to do this. You have to do this.
I would do that, but I'm so scared to get shot. I'm just light enough where they'll be like, "Oh no, sorry, man. We thought you was one of them darker ones. My bad."
Just tell them you're bringing chow for the National Guard. You'll get right through.
I'm not giving anyone water or anything. I'm just gonna put a sign on it.
Yeah.
I'm black. Really, I am.
I'm
All right. And on that note, guys, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us for a couple hours. I love these cross streams. I love having these conversations with you guys. It expands my thought process, and ultimately, I just wanted you guys to help me with this thing I'm trying to write. So
It was a
hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, happy to
Appreciate
do
you guys
it.
coming on, man. It was great. Always great to be with the Left Reckoning crew. You chaps are always bringing some great content when you're on here, man.
I'm excited to go check out Pascal and Was. I'm gonna go listen to that.
Oh yeah, people like that. Waz was like, so tell me about your life. I was like, why do you care? I was like, you guys be like all about like growing up. Tell you how you grew up. And I was like, Waz, you went to
they
the
broke down into so many Haitian colloquialisms. It is. There's a clip of it on Twitter, and I saw it, and I was like, my eyes went, oh shit.
Waz went to the same high school and elementary school that I did, literally almost like 20 years after I did. And we were just comparing stories. And he was like, what? It was like that? Really? I was like, yeah, man. It was like, interesting.
That sounds awesome.
Some Haitian class shit. It was actually a very fun.
They have 15 different words for machete in Haiti.
Gene's got jokes.
All right, guys. Well, as much as we were talking about capitalism, please enjoy music I made. And Djene put the cartoons, the capitalist realism of my childhood too. So good day, rest of you. And let's watch some college basketball a little later. I'm just going to watch it in Spanish.